Welcome, my name is Sasha Moore and I'm delighted to be moderating today's Legal Update, an initiative from Unisearch, Australia's leading and most established provider of expert opinion services. This program has been curated to provide bite-sized updates on various matter areas to help keep the profession informed about topical developments, legislative updates, and changes in the respective fields. In today's session, we're going to focus on culture and the law. Culture is increasingly in the spotlight to enable firms to stay competitive and relevant in a rapidly evolving landscape. This is compounded by changing client expectations for transparency and social responsibility, as well as the internal pressure of employee expectations. We acknowledge that this is a very challenging and perhaps overwhelming topic, which is why we've invited one of Unisearch's esteemed expert witnesses, Dr. Fiona Buick, who is the Deputy Head of the School of Education and an Associate Professor in the School of Business at the University of New South Wales in Canberra. In this session, Fiona will provide us an overview of what culture is, as well as what it's not, why we're facing a problem with culture within the legal industry, and why it's difficult to adapt to change. The upside of prioritising culture, including the correlation between culture and change management, how to implement change management practically and sustainably, and some key takeaways for more effective cultural change. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Sasha.
We're also joined here today by Unisearch's Business Development Manager, Christopher Aragnon. Christopher will provide additional context to Fiona's observation, including insights on what he's noticing about the engagement of experts, as well as the profession's cultural adaptation. Welcome, Christopher.
Thanks, Sasha. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So let's start at the top, and I'm going to put you in the hot seat, Fiona. So let's talk about what culture is firstly and what it isn't, because since having our offline discussion, my view of culture has changed quite fundamentally in terms of what a general perception of it is. So let's get cracking.
Thanks, Sasha. And it is a very overused word, so it's good that you're seeking that clarification. So what culture is it reflects the deeply embedded assumptions about what it takes to succeed within an organization and more broadly within an industry. And that is very much related to what the environmental demands are and beliefs about what the organization or industry needs to do to meet those demands. And because it's deeply embedded, these assumptions infiltrate everything within organizations. So it underpins decisions about who's made accountable for what, how decisions are made, what behaviors are rewarded, ways of working, expectations of people. I could go on and on and on, but you catch my drift. And these assumptions form over years and decades. So so culture is deeply rooted in tradition and history. So what is it not? It's not the feel-good stuff about how people feel coming into the workplace, how they feel interacting with each other. It's not what's stated necessarily in documents or on organizational websites about aspirations of what the company is about. The reality might be very different. And certainly not always in what leaders say in speeches and in their written correspondence. And importantly, because of its deep roots in history, it can't be changed on a whim. So we hear a lot of stuff around, let's change the culture, like it's something that you wave a magical wand and suddenly in the next 2 weeks, it's going to change. It's not going to. Thanks, Sasha.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think that with it being such a sort of an overused word, you do, and particularly in context, you do often associate it with pizza or, casual Friday or so on and so forth. So, and it's interesting that it is so ingrained. And I think also with the legal profession and that notion of history, precedent, that culture is so ingrained. So yeah, I can see why it can't, as you say, be changed on a whim. So moving maybe on to that next moment. So within the legal industry, as I was just saying, it is rooted in long-standing traditions and so forth. Can you maybe explain why the legal industry may be struggling with culture, as many professions are, but specifically obviously relating to law firms?
Absolutely. And I think it does go back to exactly what you've just said, because cultures are rooted in long-standing traditions that possibly once or for a while served the industry really well, hence the link with success. But it's problematic now because what we have seen is a fairly rapidly changing national and also global environment. We've got changing population demographics, so aging population, much younger, fewer younger people in the population. We've got very different career profiles, very different career preferences, very different expectations generally amongst the population, and that links with client expectations of the legal industry. And so what we may be seeing in the legal industry now is the potential for pretty significant issues with recruitment and retention of quality employees and the very people that you need their knowledge and skills to be viable and succeed. And we may also see potentially a mismatch between current ways of working and client expectations as well. Yep.
It definitely is a crossroad, I think, for the profession, and not just the legal profession by any stretch. But I think, as you were saying, it's particularly poignant for the profession because arguably, in terms of the different types of profession, it is the most ingrained in tradition and practice and expectations, as you say, which have served the industry and community and clients well to now. So to manage that change is quite substantial. But my observation for the legal industry and similar other cohorts is this is crossroad time. It's crossroad time right now. So I feel that you're spot on, that there's going to be a point, and that point is pretty much now or within the immediate or short-term future, where firms that embrace culture, who do very much embrace the adaptability that is required, as you were saying, whether that's internally or whether that's of client expectations or other, there's going to be a bigger and bigger divide because of the tsunami of concurrent change that is mandating the profession change. And Chris, again, we'll go to your thoughts in a minute, but I can't imagine a more perfect storm, in the sense that we've had COVID, we've got these change of work-life expectations, we've got the substantial change of expectations cross-generationally, but particularly in the younger demographic, who are not afraid of being upfront about what their expectations are. And consequently, that talent gap, I expect, could be quite challenged. So I think that there is definitely going to be a greater and greater divide within the industry in terms of which firms very much adapt, with purposefully adapt, opposed to pizza day adapt to prioritizing culture. So on that note, just looking at the upside of prioritizing culture and the correlation between culture and change management, I sort of almost encourage the industry to not look at the word as culture because of its slippery context, but if you look at it as a vehicle to change management, to me that's a more quantifiable way to approach it, and how we can then utilize change management and that adaptability to then correlate with success. So Fiona, if I can go back to you, what would you see as the metrics? What would you see as the upside of prioritizing this change management and adaptability within firms?
I think you've already touched on it, Sasha. So I think it is about the imperative to change, and where the risks of not adapting to a significantly changed context are so high that firms could risk the viability of their companies, I think it's that burning platform. You think about change management. I think there sounds like there's a pretty significant burning platform for change. And I also like the way that you're encouraging the audience to think about it in terms of change management, because cultural change is slippery. And it's why we hear so many calls for cultural change and nothing happens. But I think if you think about it in terms of change management, there are well-established frameworks for change management, which start with what's the compelling vision for change? What's the reason? What's the burning platform? And why? Why do we need to change? Which is so powerful in terms of initiating the change that's needed. And then what I would also encourage people to think about is the fact that it doesn't have to be this big mammoth, scary, insurmountable thing that you cannot grab hold of. Because using change management frameworks and thinking about behavioral change, I would argue, is key to the way forward.
No, I think that that's really good, and I like that there are frameworks that are available because I imagine being a lawyer that this would be quite confronting. It's almost like that health message. You know, you've got to get fit to be healthy, but you know how do you actually do this? What does this look like in the real world? So and if we go back to sort of the general principles of those frameworks. Can you provide some insights in terms of how firms might go about that change management piece practically, but then also, to your point, sustainably, so then that notion of a whim becomes redundant?
Yeah, great question. So I would say again, starting with that burning platform for change. So be very clear about what needs to change and why. Why? What's the desired state? Where do you think we need to move to? And having a clear picture of that and making sure that the leaders within the industry are engaging with employees and they're having these collaborative conversations around what it looks like, because you've got to bring people along with you. There's
And I
no
think,
point coming up with a beautiful change management plan and no one's with you. It's not going to work.
yeah, I think that that's a really, really critical point because I've been involved with lots of change management discussions, but where I see the drop off and the disengagement is in the lack of collaboration. And again, it almost, I would imagine, reinforces the culture that you're trying to abandon by, if you don't manage it collaboratively, it just helps reinforce that how it is how it's always going to be. It's just going to look slightly different. We're going to give it a slightly different name. So in terms of that approach, identifying what the needs are, the needs to change and why, how can you give me a best practice example, or can you give me an example of where, not necessarily with names or companies, but just a process where you've seen that work really well?
That's a good question. I have never seen it work well. So I'm so sorry that it's not quite the answer you were looking for.
No, not at all.
But you need,
I love the honesty of it.
but you also need to know my practitioner background and my research is focused on the public sector, and we know, no offense, but it's not really best practice a lot of the time. So I might get shot down for saying that, but I think what I would urge, I'll give you some names. I'm not going to do it here, but I'll give you some sources that people can have a look at in terms of there's models that are stepped through. There's research that shows how this could be done.
Yep.
But a benefit of being an academic is we can sit in the space that this is how it could be done, but maybe have never seen it actually happen in the way that we would hope. But there's just a couple of points I wanted to pick up and just to elaborate on what I was saying.
Yep.
But I just want to say something that you mentioned before about not bringing people on board. A common thing that leaders and managers might complain about is that my employees are resistant to change. You think, well, they may be resistant if you don't bring them along, if you don't consult, if you don't engage in the collaborative conversations where it's clear why you need to change. But also remember, as human beings, something we fear is loss. So working with employees to get a sense of what do they feel they're going to lose, and working with leaders as well. What do leaders think they're going to lose? Are they going to lose power, prestige, authority? What are the various things that people might be holding on to really tightly? And how can we paint a vision where the future state can allay those concerns, because you're not going to be losing, all you're going to be doing is gaining. And what are the gains as opposed to the losses? I think is the, and there's loads of literature on this as well. It's a well-researched area. And then thinking about the behavioral change element of change your performance management, your reward management systems, your learning and development processes, all towards the behaviors that you're trying to encourage. Make sure that the desired behaviors are reinforced again and again and again. Expectations are clear. Because if you do that, behaviors change. And then if you find that actually you're meeting client expectations, the firm's able to succeed, then you have a potential way forward for changing the culture, because that success over time, before you know it, won't be straight away, but maybe in a few years' time, it'll become the standard ways of working. And I think that's a much more manageable way of thinking about how do we shift from where we are now to a more desired state. And it's more practical because you can do it. We've got the levers in the organizations to do it. Like every day, it's just whether or not you exercise a choice to do that.
Yeah, no, I love that. So, Chris, just turning to you and putting you in the spotlight for a minute, I'd love to hear from Unisearch's perspective. Obviously, you're dealing with scores of different lawyers and firms for a range of matters all the time. What changes have you noticed in the profession relating to the prioritization of culture?
Thanks, Sasha. That's a really good question. And thank you, Fiona, for your insights. I could see a lot of first principle thinking coming through, and I really like the frameworks that you're describing. I think there's a lot for us to learn about it. In terms of the legal profession, there's a lot of patterns that are starting to emerge from the data and our day-to-day interactions with our clients. I guess the first thing is psychological safety is essential to protecting lawyers across all matters. These lawyers, they need environments where they can raise concerns, they can challenge assumptions, and they can collaborate openly. Now, these firms are now realizing that that psychological safety is key to risk management and clear thinking. And essentially, when these teams can collaborate openly and test ideas, they mitigate risks better and they deliver stronger outcomes. The second thing that we're noticing is that values-driven leadership is really shaping firm culture. So building on Fiona's points around taking people on that journey, the legal leaders that we're seeing are top of class define their culture through their decisions. That's how they set priorities, how they manage risk, and how they guide their teams through complexity. So one really good example that we're seeing is ESG. So it's embedded in firm strategy, it's influencing governance, and it's also influencing the clients that firms are deciding to work with. Now, the firms leading this shift recognize this and they embed it into their leadership to drive long-term resilience and better outcomes for all. And finally, one of the key things that we're noticing is that large language models are really reshaping the delivery and the culture within law firms. And of course, it's not fully replacing human judgment just yet. But firms are adopting these large language models for case management, drafting, research. But while these technologies enhance outcomes, the firms really need key employees to validate the outputs. So we're finding that the shift is cultural. It's all about how these firms are training these team members, how they're structuring pricing, and how they're increasing that transparency with their clients to let them know that generative AI is being used in parts of their matters. So ultimately, firms that can foster trust, adaptability, and strong values are really best placed to help bring their employees on this journey and navigate our profession's evolving landscape.
Really, really excellent feedback, Chris. And you've raised so many interesting and aligned points. And for me also, it's looking at change management. If we come back to that change management piece versus culture, you raised an excellent point that firms are actively and progressively adopting how AI fits within their firm. So the change management is already happening. So the culture piece as part of it is actually, to that point, quite a natural time and quite a natural synthesis of firms already adapting to other environmental factors, which are in turn affecting the culture. And as you say, the culture, whether that's the processes, the systems, the response, the onus of responsibility, and so on and so forth. So I love this topic so much, and I could talk about it for ages, but to keep it bite-sized, I might wrap. So Fiona, thank you so much for your insights. I really take away that culture is very ingrained and it can't be changed on a whim. And further to what I was just saying, that if we look at culture rather than this slippery term, look at it as change management, and look at change management as starting with the why and being very clear about what needs to change and why it needs to change before we look at the how it has to change, and really looking at well-established frameworks, which we'll share, as well as the basis for that, then provides a framework and a vision or a pathway to then achieve that vision. Chris, I loved your notion about the key of psychological safety in terms of the prioritization to have robust, safe discussions, to then have better outcomes, and to embrace the voice of the team, which that collaboration does then obviously start to manifest cultural change within a practice or other. The value-driven leadership is consistent again with your takeouts, Fiona, in terms of every single piece of positive behavior that's happening on a daily basis is either rewarded or picked up. So further to what you were saying, Fiona, this isn't just a on the whim quick fix. It's those tiny little micro moments of what are we doing, and is this again, in my world, is this on brand? Is this how we want to foster the culture of the organization? Is this in line with how and why we're going to get to that end outcome? So thank you so much to both of you for your insights, and to everyone who's tuned in. I hope you've enjoyed.